Hello, everybody. We have our incredibly competent team of debaters and coaches here to discuss our Theory Thursday, third Thursday theory.
Today's Wednesday, but yeah.
Oh,
Something about
well,
a map.
I'll see you tomorrow. All right, bye. All right. It's
What was that
Wednesday,
about competence?
We got Tim CV, we got Matt Shapiro, we got Jared Kubik and Miller. We are all here. We're going to be talking about the fascinating world of Italian cars. Yes. Fiat is not just an Italian car. It is also an important debate concept that people use and abuse all the time.
Knowingly and unknowingly, by the way.
Yes. Just like me. I get knowingly and unknowingly abused and used.
Right. I say I've been waiting a whole lifetime to be objectified. You know what I mean? Let's do it.
All right. So let's do it. Let's start with what in the hell is Fiat, right? Because it is one of those things that people learn really, really early on.
Right.
In debate.
It's something we do whether you know what it is or not in debate, just so you know. Also, I think it's like it's a tool, right? It's this thing that allows us to go into a world after passing plan or something like that. So, Jared, what is Fiat? What does it mean? It means something in what? Farsi? Is it Italian? What was it?
No, it's definitely Italian. It's Italian.
It's Latin. Right.
Latin, but kind of the same, right?
No.
Very much.
Old world Italian.
Yeah, I mean, Italian is a Romance language, and I always used to think that meant it was like, I don't know, passionate.
You can steal your girl?
Yeah, because it originated from Rome, so that's what it meant. Oh, man.
Yeah, it's Latin. It's Latin, like lots of doctor terms and lawyer terms are Latin. It's a debate term that's Latin, and it means not what they say San Diego means in Anchorman. What does it mean, Jared?
It means let it be.
Let it be.
Or make it so. That's also
make it
what
so.
Yeah. That's like the Star Trek version of it.
Right. And just to, give a very quick, definition or, conceptually understanding of what it is. Every time you have ever said, I'm going to pass a plan that doesn't exist right now, and this is what the world looks like afterwards, you just used Fiat, whether you know it or not. You just said, let it be, make it so, and you're going to play with the reality after a plan which doesn't exist. And
how many Fiats does that government team get?
If you go to the show, if you go to Oprah's show, maybe one each.
You get a Fiat. You get a Fiat. You get a Fiat.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are some. Okay, there's some rules that people think exist about Fiat, but the fundamental concept is, I think, a good one. Okay, which is the concept is that. All right. I always think about how debates happen over, decades and hundreds of years and stuff like that. And so round after round after round, you probably came across an argument at one point where somebody said that would never really happen. Congress would never really pass that law. Right. You're like, well, let's just pretend like they did so we could argue the advantages and disadvantages. Because otherwise, we're just going to be arguing about which, senators vote which way and how consistently and whether or not it would actually ever pass. And that really, we're really, really limiting ourselves in the debate world if that is what we devolve into every single time we want to talk about public policy. We want to have a richer discussion about the issues. Then let's just kind of assume that a plan passes, even though it doesn't have much of a chance in real world, and then discuss whether or not it would actually be a good idea. That's the longer version of Fiat.
And just to add a little nuance to what you just said, Jared, I mean, saying something like Congress would never pass something, there's a little bit of nuance to that, meaning, let's pretend that there's a Republican-controlled House and Senate, and you're trying to pass a very left blue bill. Saying Congress would never pass it now might be a very legitimate argument. I just want to make the nuanced kind of distinction between saying something like that as a retort or as a response to Congress would never pass it, to saying something like, just as an example that I remember from the past, mining the moon for energy. That might be something that is, Congress would never pass it, whether it's red or blue or anything, because what the argument essentially is that like it's never been done, it's really expensive, and it's insane. So that is kind of you can saying Congress wouldn't pass it is not Fiat attack on Fiat necessarily. If you're kind of drawing facts from the world we live in.
How did you learn it, Tim?
Go ahead.
It is one action that is within reason, so that's where there becomes some area for interpretation.
Right.
One action that the government team gets to do, because otherwise we get nowhere. So the government gets exactly one fiat, like we passed this policy, or an executive order is passed, or this person's whatever the thing is that happens. But you can only use one actor. That gets a little bit muddy, obviously, because Congress technically is like, an
actor who makes other actors do things.
The president has to sign, so that's like another actor. So, but usually you get away with that kind of thing. So you normally get away with like using a body of power as fiat.
Right.
What I've heard that some of those limitations come down to, though, is it's almost like the genie 3 wishes thing. Like you can't fiat like Kim Jong-un will sign a peace treaty with South Korea. Like that's too far of fiat, because that's like taking like hearts and minds, like fiating impossibility, or fiating like a personal position. A very unlikely thing. Too extreme.
Okay. Yeah. So
I've heard that's
I see how that is. Yeah.
I went to in law school. Okay, and in law, there's this concept of the reasonable person. And so a lot of the standards you'll see, like for negligence, for instance, is, you're liable if you're unreasonable. Okay, unreasonable is up to interpretation, like the limits of fiat is up to interpretation. But it really reminds me of the reasonable person concept in law, where you're really, when you want to assert fiat, you want to show, using hopefully information and facts and studies, that what you're trying to say is very possible, feasible. It's within the realm of understanding and science and whatever.
Do you really have to justify that, though? Like, if you said, "Here's my plan, and here's why that plan's real."
Well, no. See, we're going to get into it, but it depends on the plan. If you're going to say that dolphins are going to be used as police for the rest of time, that you're going to have to explain some things. You know what I mean? If you're going to say that you could build a freeway to Reno, it's feasible. We could build a freeway to Reno, Tim.
He really, really wants a freeway.
Yeah, I hate this idea.
The difference in feasibility, though, is the reasonableness or the feasible. The ability to do those two things, dolphins running the law enforcement and building a freeway to Reno, are two extremes, right? Like one is extremely possible. One, you're going to have to give me evidence. You're going to have to tell the judge something beyond just, well, they're really smart and they are smart in the water, so they can be smart on the ground. Like that you're going to need something.
Yeah, what people kind of overlook in their discussion or understanding of fiat is they get bogged down into what are the rules, and there aren't rules. It's like, how can we use this to make debate better? That's how you should be thinking about it.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the ridiculous proposal that Kim Jong-un will unilaterally sign a peace treaty with somebody else. And so I agree. I think I would argue like that's kind of a ridiculous use of fiat, because I don't think that really gets to the heart of the North-South conflict in Korea. That would be like one argument.
And bypasses all the evidence.
Yeah.
But
but the second thing I'd say is that you don't get to fiat people's attitudes. So Kim Jong-un would still be just as hostile, but with a peace treaty. And now you're like,
with an ally.
When you have two hostile groups that are bound by a peace treaty, they're just going to break the peace treaty. And you say, well, no, they wouldn't do that because he signed it in good faith. That's where the abuse comes in.
Ooh,
right?
Good faith.
Technically, I'm like, okay, you can fiat the signing of the peace treaty, but you can't fiat that they're going to abide by
Remain peaceful for 100 years.
Yeah, the tension that's existed for 100 years, you don't just get to ignore that. Once you start ignoring reality, real world implications and stuff like that, that's when you start saying it's like, okay, now you're using fiat in a way to stop debating rather than to help debate. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually decreasing debate. It's decreasing the evidence that we're allowed to introduce.
Right.
We're like, we can't even reference the hundreds of years or, you know, maybe dozens of years of Korean history in this debate because you just kind of poof made it up, right? That's why people hate Fiat. Which
the neg on that side, or I'm just gonna put you on the aff saying Kim Jong Il is gonna do that. The neg would have they would not need to work very hard to explain how the New York Times and everyone else this is impossible, meaning it's not feasible, it's not reasonable, and even if it happened, what Jared just said, basically, like, even if it did happen, just because they signed a treaty doesn't mean he's not still this violent person with a nuke. So my point is, go ahead, Tim.
I think I can get to your point. Another rule, even though they're not rules, a fairly decent rule is you cannot fiat solvency. So if the resolution were something like this house would improve relationships between the Republic of Korea and South Korea, between Israel and Iran and Pakistan, Palestine. They sign a peace treaty. That is fiating solvency. You're not allowed to do that because you're just literally skipping over the debate and jumping to the end, like Jared said. So you're just saying like, hey, look, it's solved.
We haven't said the word yet. What is this called when you say, I'm going to fiat peace between Israel and Palestine? What is that called?
It's abuse. Fiat abuse.
Fiat abuse. We haven't used that word yet in the 11:56 minutes.
I'm pretty sure we did. Anyway,
I don't think we've said abuse. So not the word fiat abuse. I mean,
that's being recorded.
Fiat solvency. So there are a couple, like, if not hard written rules, there are a couple general norms surrounding fiat, and we've hit a couple of them so far. So you can only fiat one actor or one thing, like one policy passing.
Right.
And you can't fiat solvency, and you can't fiat like hearts and minds, feelings. So what happens when people start to break those things? So
well, I have a question for you. We always talk about connecting dots, right, in debate. So when you argue something and use fiat to create that world where you've implemented some plan, you are allowed to connect dots to your impacts. Which aren't necessarily multi-plank plans, right? I mean, if you say something will happen and attitudes will change and then you get your impact, is that too many steps? Or I'm kind of asking you, Tim, because that I've always wondered, and I've had issues there because you don't want to do multi-plank, but you're kind of saying as a result of this one action, several things can occur.
Sure. Well, like link chains, link stories still happen. So you still get to terminal impacts via like a series of events. So like just Congress signing a bill doesn't actually physically change anything. Mm-hmm. It's that you have to create the links. Like, okay, if this bill passes, then this would reasonably happen, and this would happen, and this would happen, this would happen, and here's the impacts. So you still have to do the work as a debater to say what all of those policy implications, those impacts.
How you get there. Right.
Now, one point that I would still disagree with you on, though, is you don't want a multi-planked plan. This is where I've seen people 100% like skip around or start to press the rules of fiat abuse, is having a multi-planked plan where, like, in order for our plan to function, it's going to do three things. First, we're going to create this agency. Mm-hmm. Second, we're going to arm them with this capability. And third, we're going to give them this power. And like, I rarely see teams push back on a multi-planked plan as fiat abuse. I think it is oftentimes, but I've also totally run multi-planked plans and like generally
until someone tells you no, right? Yeah.
Well, I think that's where you start to get
a little hazy right there because I can't think of a policy that's passed through Congress that didn't have multiple parts to it, and so like where do you draw the line?
Let me ask you.
Even when you're talking about like multiple actors, I've seen debates where it's kind of like, okay, so you had the House of Representatives pass it, and then Senate pass it, and then the president sign it. That's multiple actors. I'm like,
and
so
you have to.
That's why I like collapsing down to: does this make the debate? Can we talk about the issues that are implied within the topic better through this analysis, or worse?
Two quick things. Like one. On one side, I'm just coming to this now. If you just get down on some like government procedure, I bet you could just use all kinds of evidence to tear apart every single plan, whether the merits are good or wrong, just using that and talking about multiple actors. It's a trash debate in a lot of ways, I guess. But I would hate it. But you could probably even win if you got them off their game. Second thing, Jared and Tim, both of you, this is to you. Would you consider a multi-plank plan if I say, Congress is going to allocate $10 trillion to education, and my advantage is, economy, and I say the students will get a better education, which is that an actor, and then those students will make more money and push science or whatever.
No.
You're still doing the sort of causal, chain of events, from that one act, but you don't automatically get to win the economic advantage. Like, if I run a system shock disadvantage where a $10 trillion price tag is too much of a one-time shock to overcome, you know what I mean? It's like you never get to the economic advantages because it takes students so long to graduate, get a job, and start paying back those taxes. We'll never get to that point. Our economy will collapse before then.
So that's Jared's point, is it becomes debatable. Your advantage is debatable. You cannot fiat your advantage. You are just arguing your advantage. You fiat that the plan passes, and that's not debated. So the other side isn't going to be like, no, that won't happen. That would be arguing fiat, and that's where you get to say, like, no, I fiated it. Just let that part go. Let's debate what would happen if it were to pass. You
could see where I am coming from, though, where we're kind of assuming an actor, being the students, would actually...
You're assuming that because you're the debater trying to make that link story. You're the debater saying, when money goes to schools, students spend more time. Like, you have to argue those things. So, like, that's not you fiating them. That's you just arguing them as a debater, and you need to follow the Toolman model and everything, and then we'll agree and disagree on it with differing evidence and retorts.
Yeah.
So another piece of like fiat abuse that I see happen, I mean, we've already kind of talked about it a bit, but it is multi-actor fiat abuse, where I've seen, like, in preempting a disadvantage, a team will say, like, the federal government's going to do this and the states will do this. And so
that's
because
clear, right?
The negative side is going to be like, nope, counterplan, state's going to do it first. And they're like, haha, we're going to be clever and have the Fed and states do it. And that immediately becomes a multi-actor fiat abuse. Like, that's very clearly there.
Cut and dry. That would be
straightforward. But when I see people do like two different agencies with the same like policy intention, like the legislative branch is going to pass this thing and the executive branch is going to enforce these things that are different. I've seen those things happen before, like they're multi-actor plans, and that seems like that would be fiat abuse. Like, they've got to pick one side of it.
But that's also
making a team pick their side, right? Like, it's making the government parametricize, like, choose this is our single actor and everything else gets to be neg ground.
If I may, I'm going to say two answers to what you just said. First, when you said something to the effect of, Congress passes the law and then the president enforces it, I would simply argue, we say this too casually sometimes. That's normal means. That's how the system works. Right. So I would argue that it was Congress that passed the plan. The president has to enforce it. It's not even. There's veto power and things like that. But once it's in, they have to enforce it. What you're also mentioning, though, which is true, and this kind of goes back to that whole like political system at the time. Let's say the House and the Senate is Republican or very red or right, and the president is very blue and left, and they pass some plan, and he, bastardizes it in the enforcement or something like that. That is possible. I mean, that would not in my mind be fiat abuse, especially with evidence. But if you are simply using two actors to do different things with no evidence that would actually happen, I would 100% agree with you that that's a fiat abuse, a multi-actor situation, and you would. I don't want to deviate. I want to kind of elaborate on something I've been thinking about. The farther you are from something that's logically feasible, generally known in general knowledge, the more evidence you must present to show how it's possible. I mean, that's just almost a direct sliding scale correlation. If you want to say building a bridge to Reno, you don't need to explain
a bridge
a freeway to Reno. You don't need to explain how freeways are made necessarily. I mean, but if you are going to mine the moon, which has never even been done, you're going to need to show us how that happens, because it's not just something we understand without it's not general knowledge.
I can see where you're coming with that, right? Like, I would also urge debaters though to play it out, right? Like, so don't assume that the technology works. Just assume that the plan was okayed, that it was voted for. It's like, all right, we have now made the decision to go to the moon. Let's see whether or not we could actually execute it. All right. And so that's not necessarily. And so if they're saying, no, we fiated that it works, yes, that's kind of ridiculous. Like,
that's fiating solvency.
Yeah.
Unless it's very simple. Unless it's a freeway to Reno.
No,
right?
no. Even then, you could say that, like if we're like, okay, a bullet train from San Francisco down to LA is feasible, but it's been a disaster, right? Because you can predict that politicians are going to screw up massive projects like that. You can say it's going to go over budget. It's going to be horrible. Those are the type of arguments that you can make. And so you could say the same thing for mining the moon, but the impacts on that is not quite like it'll be over budget. You could just say, we're not going to be able to successfully mine the moon like you assume we are, because the technology just doesn't work.
So again, your fiat is not saying like that the thing happens. It's saying that the policy to do the thing happens.
Yes,
that's all that you're allowed to.
But also the world. No, I disagree. You get access to the world after plan, and you get to use advantages in a policy style debate to show what this world looks like. And in my mind, that is as much fiat as the passing of the plan itself, or whatever the policy change is. You know, you're literally arguing something that has never happened. And
there's where I think I can draw the clear distinction there.
Okay.
A plan is not debated that the plan will happen. There's no point. Like, I mean, you can have a feasibility. Like, if we look at this as a time frame, right? Like, the second that the plan passes, the next second is when you can start having a feasibility disadvantage of saying, like, well, that's not going to, that's not reasonable, that's not possible. Or you can have a, like,
arguing fiat abuse,
right? Because it's the next second. The second after you wave your magic fiat wand, everything now becomes a debate. Yeah. As you're waving that fiat wand, though, like, that is not debatable. So, like, the plan passing, that's you utilizing fiat, and the other side can't be like, no, you're not allowed to pass a plan. That's reasonable. But you saying this is going to happen, and this will happen, and this will happen, yeah, you get to debate it, and that's just it. Like, you can also lose because they could debate you better. Like, they can turn your advantage. They can give better disadvantages. They can, take points out of it.
I want to go ahead, Jared. If you have something to say, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the ways that people have, one of the more entertaining ways that people abuse fiat is like when they say, like, Congress unanimously passes this law, right? They say everyone votes in favor of it, because if somebody wants to run like a politics disadvantage, they say that plan is going to piss off half of the country.
They took too much ground. They took too much.
And they're going to piss off half the country. There's going to be political backlash, and here's all the horrible stuff that'll happen because of it.
It's probably like never happened, right?
Yeah, I passed the law with unanimous consent, so that means that everyone was in favor of it. So nobody's going to be. That's ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Yes.
That removes that particular type of debate, and I think that is legitimate abuse. But just saying that it passes is not the abuse part, right? We want to debate whether or not building freeways is a good use of our money, not whether, it's like we don't want to debate who is in favor of freeways in Congress in 2021. Like, that's not the central part of whatever the resolution is. The central part is like the environmental or economic repercussions of those massive projects. Right.
What you're talking about, though, is very much based on debate to debate situations. And for anyone listening, I mean, in my opinion, Jared, you're right. If the person's being honest and true with the merit of their plan, being reasonable or possible, whatever word we want to use, I do think also. One thing I wanted to bring up was we kind of mentioned in the beginning how, like, the AF uses fiat. On the neg, I want to say one thing outright where I think the neg uses fiat too, especially when they run counter plans where they are now kind of showing the world their way. That is a counter. That is fiat in my mind. First of all, right. Even if we use Tim's definition saying only the plan is the fiat, well, you're still using that plan.
Right.
And second of all, I would argue after listening and having this discussion with you, Tim, I would kind of argue that you said, fiat ends the plan and then we have the debate. I would argue that, the debate, as you just kind of set out, is a debate on whose fiat is the most reasonable. I mean, you're trying to argue that your reality after plan is more in line with what will actually happen than the other team.
I mean, not really, though, because like you can have a wild plan, and then you can have like a super reasonable counter plan, and I could still win the debate because my plan ends up with better repercussions. Because we're still playing theory ball, right? Like none of this stuff actually happens. So we're running theoretical plans, and theoretically, universal basic income is better, like it just does more good than raising the minimum wage by 30 cents. It's more reasonable that we raise the minimum wage by 30 cents, but I can come with better, it's less.
Let me ask you this.
BI passes, but I can come up with way cooler, better advantages. And like, you can tell me that it's not reasonable, but I can probably debate that back and say like, yeah, it's not as reasonable as 30 cents, but it's still reasonable enough that we should do it. All debates don't come down to reasonability arguments generally.
Let me ask you this. Let's, in a vacuum, very quick, and let's fiat something right here, right now. Let's say Jared Miller is debating Jared Miller. They are equal. They are equal. I want to take the debater kind of out of the room for a second because I realize that you could have great debaters just smash all over teams who run better plans than them and know more than them. That happens all the time. I am saying if you have Jared Miller on one side on the AF running a plan that's very reasonable, and then you have a Jared Miller on the neg who has a counter plan that's crazy. And when I say crazy, I just mean it's very difficult to even understand scientifically or theoretically how it would even work. And they're both battling it out line by line. So there's no obvious winner aside from the merits of their argument. I truly believe that you would vote for the more reasonable team because you're going, hey, like at the end of the day, we argue about this all the time. A good idea is a good idea, but like if it doesn't actually work, then why does it even matter, right? I mean, and the arguments we make to prove that reality makes a good debater and makes a person who has nothing better than the other side or something like that. What do you think, Tim? Prove me wrong.
I don't. How many debates do you vote on reasonability as your only voting?
Okay, I'll give you an example.
Premise,
Let's
right?
do this. I
don't
pass universal basic income. Everybody gets $2,000 a month. That's not going to happen anytime soon, right? Just absolutely not going to happen. It's higher than most people suggest, and universal basic income at any level is not going to be a reality in the United States anytime soon. If somebody comes back and says, no, let's just raise the minimum wage, if I say, no, there's way more advantages to having a universal basic income, if the response is like, well, raising the minimum wage is just more reasonable. It's more likely.
Right.
I still
think probability, right? Like probability is a weighing mechanism that we've talked about here. Like that's an important one certainly to measure. So, and you're totally right, Matt. Like reasonability is important. I'm saying that not every debate comes down to that, especially when you have oftentimes a pretty wild plan that most likely in the real world wouldn't pass and a really wild counter plan that in the real world wouldn't pass. That happens all the time. I think reasonability debates sometimes can honestly feel joyless and so debaters don't go for them or judges don't really care about them as much. Because most of the things that we're passing as plans, like fiating, are not likely to actually pass in the real world. It is
but I hate that. I hate that. I honestly, I realize we're running out of time, but there is an aspect, and I have voted down people with insane, great plans that solve all the problems of the world because the other team simply stands there and kind of says, that can't happen. Now, you can't just say they're ridiculous. You do need to explain how it's not possible. That's the last thing we should probably say here.
I'll
You
give
need
an
to
example
explain that.
Okay, so one time I did get really pissed off at one of my debaters. They were running a counter plan on some energy policy, right? It's like what people were trying to do some like renewable energy, and they counter planned with thorium reactors. It's like, let's not do more solar power plants. Let's do thorium reactors, and that will solve it. And like, and they're like, yeah, we'll just do this tomorrow. And my problem with that is thorium reactors, like it'll take decades to get to the point where they are producing that amount of energy. And so
We must bootstrap to reality.
yeah, but it's not that you can't it's not that you can't approve thorium reactors today. We could approve that today. We could pass a law that puts $1 trillion.
But it doesn't solve today's problems, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but what they're doing is they're fiating the solvency that we're going to get that energy tomorrow, right? It's like we're not going to get that energy tomorrow. No. The earliest we're going to get that is in 20 years.
So at the very beginning of your plan, when you said half the people are cold in Texas because of power problems, that's still the problem tomorrow. And thank you for your plan, and the grandkids of us will all benefit, maybe.
Yeah, but the point is that you don't just say it's like, well, your plan is unreasonable, so you lose.
You have to explain that
your plan, you're not getting the advantages. It's like, fine, you passed the plan. It's on paper.
You didn't solve the problems you brought into this round, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that the actual power plants are built tomorrow. There's no evidence that is possible.
I do love creative debaters doing lots of research and coming up with lots of evidence as to why crazy plans will work. And I do vote for them when they are well thought out and explained with evidence as how it's possible, even if it's insane. But I also just think, you can't just say, click a finger and thorium reactors are tomorrow. And you also can't just say that's ridiculous, and so you vote for me. You have to expound on why and do these link stories and connect the dots. That's still the art of the debate, and that's where you can kind of persuade someone your reality is better than theirs.
All right. I think we talked enough about the Fiat, huh?
It's good seeing you all again. Nolan, good to hear from you, buddy.
Yeah.
Tim and Jerry, good to see you too.
All right. Hey, we got Tim, Matt, and Jared. We're Debate Sensei. We'll see you next week, all right? See you later.